It's been 2 years since Crystal Light released and its first batch rolled out. The budget alternative headset from Pimax that became more popular than we ever expected. Not surprisingly though, there are many thousands of users still rocking it today, both casual VR gamers and VR flight and racing enthusiasts. Today we get a new generation of a VR headset on a budget, so to say, the Dreamair SE. A headset that might become very popular. I covered the first impressions plus benchmarks in my recent videos, and if you watch these, you probably know why I think so. To sum it up, it is a no-brainer. But then you might ask, is this a worthy upgrade from the Crystal Light? And maybe even more importantly, if you are looking for a high-end VR headset, although a bit stripped down and therefore cheaper, should you aim for the Dreamair SE or consider the older but community-approved Crystal Light? Because if you look at the price, it's not that much different. I think it's all about understanding the benefits you'll get from each headset. And I'm gonna be completely honest here, I wasn't really prepared for the conclusion of this comparison I'm sharing with you today. So yeah, let's get started. Obviously, in terms of design and form factor, Dreamair SE just kills it. It's an extremely light, small form factor headset with identical design to the current flagship Dreamair. The device alone without the strap is right above 150 grams only, with the strap less than 300 grams or so. Now compare that to the Crystal Light that is considerably bigger and heavier. Some will say a small form factor is game-changing, while others might not care or even defy that statement. So how about comfort then? Well, that's kind of a different story if you ask me. At least as of now. Let me explain. It's been a while since I used my Crystal Light, and it's easy to get used to something that you wear on a daily basis, in my case the Dreamair and also now the SE. But last week when I tried the Crystal Light again, I immediately felt like coming back home or something. There's just something about this strap and the way it sits on my head and balances out the weight that satisfies me somehow. The strap of Crystal Light makes a heavier and bulkier headset feel kind of small after all. I know it sounds odd, and this is a very subjective opinion from my side, which might even feel controversial, but I'll be honest here, I do still prefer Crystal Light in terms of comfort. The easy and quick way of putting it on, plus the extremely good weight distribution. Also, the Comfort Kit facial interface rests perfectly on my face, and the fabric just gives me a cozier feeling than the PU leather. I know there are hard straps and other face masks coming out to SE and Dreamair, and I also ordered the Studioform X1P kit for the SE and the Dreamair, so I might change my mind soon. But strangely enough, and completely against all rules of physics, my baldy head and my old man's face finds the Crystal Light more comfortable overall. Maybe I'm still stuck in that old school VR era, but there's just something with the way I put on and wear the light that feels more casual to me. I don't feel as strapped. Anyway, now I've said it. In terms of audio quality, if we just look at what you get by default without paying for optional straps or headphones, the tiny 3D spatial audio speakers bundled with the Dreamair SE are clearly better than the bundled SMAS speakers on the Crystal Light. As always, it depends on what you do in VR, but not only with casual gaming, but also simulators and when watching movies in VR, I feel that the speakers of the SE and the Dreamair, of course, although being much smaller, do provide a wider audio with higher definition and a better calibrated sense of 3D sound. Obviously, that changes if you add another 88 euros or $100 and screw on a pair of DMAS speakers on your light, because these speakers are just playing in its own league, I think. Especially in terms of bass, but also mid-range frequency clarity and a punchier audio overall. Tracking is another thing to consider. Let's not forget that the Crystal Light comes with slam tracking and bundled controllers, while the SE price we just looked at is for the Lighthouse version. The slam track version of the Dreamair SE with 2 controllers cost a bit more than the Lite. And if you ever need to switch to lighthouse tracking with base stations, you buy a lighthouse faceplate for the Crystal Light that you can click on at any point. Whereas with the Dreamer SE, it's just not as modular, and it's also sold in two versions, lighthouse tracked or slam tracked. Once you pick one of those, there's no way changing tracking type. Choices. Okay, having design, comfort, audio, and tracking out of the way, let's focus on what you actually see inside of these two VR headsets, which might be even more important after all. First off, the per-panel resolution of the Crystal Light is, on paper, higher than the Dreamer SE. You all know this already, but Light uses a pair of QLED panels with integrated local dimming, while the SE houses two micro-OLED displays. Each technology has its own strengths and weaknesses, of course. These QLED on the Light can do not only 90 Hz but also 120 Hz refresh rate in native resolution, while the Dreamer SE is kind of stuck at 72 Hz in native mode with just an upscale mode available in 90 Hz. Some people value refresh rate higher than anything else, while others simply don't even see the difference. Same goes for the lenses, both having their own specific pros and cons. Like Crystal Light have two huge aspheric glass lenses. Dreamer SE, on the other hand, relies on two much smaller pancake lenses to optically match those tiny micro-OLED panels. Now, in terms of the perceived resolution and screen door effect, both are very similar to my eyes. None of these have any visible SDE or a screen door effect. The higher resolution of the QLED panels also does not really outshine the lower res micro OLED panels on the SE, but if you really look close at fine details or very tiny text, you will eventually see a finer definition rendered on the Crystal Light, which I didn't expect to see. As I said, it's been a while since I used this thing. Regarding sharpness in general, across the view, both headsets are very similar. Although when running both headsets side by side, I must admit that the Crystal Light has ever so slightly higher clarity in the center part of the view. And don't let this confuse you, because sharpness and clarity are not the same thing. I also think it's a different kind of image clarity what you get with the Crystal Light. And that is due to multiple factors, and please correct me if I'm wrong here. First, the image is considerably brighter on the Crystal Light. We know this because the QLED panels are brighter and the aspheric glass lenses do not block out light rays as much as the pancake lenses do. And a brighter image is most often perceived as sharper, which is just a fact or a perceptual or optical phenomena. Secondly, the combination of very bright image and lenses with complete lack of glare and God rays gives the optical image a slightly punchier look without that little haze you can see caused by the glare. You might think that glare only affects dark scenes, but that's not true. In some cases, like when looking outside in the default SteamVR home environment in the bright daylight, the clarity of these spherical lenses is noticeably higher with the Crystal Light because of the lack of glare. Thirdly, something that also contributes to better clarity, I think, is the actual rendered resolution per eye on default, which is vastly higher on the Light, which is on its own a downside, but more about that when we talk about performance in a moment. And lastly, I also think that the center part of the view simply have better optical clarity thanks to the custom aspheric glass lenses of the Crystal Light. At least the center 50 or maybe 60 degrees, while the pancake lens clarity is more uniform across the view. Regarding the view, by the way, or the field of view, Crystal Light renders roughly 10 degrees more vertically than the SE does, while the horizontal field of view is roughly the same, which is hardly noticeable, I think. A larger vertical field of view can be rewarding in room-scale games or shooters, while simulators will not benefit as much, especially racing simulators, where you can actually even decrease the vertical field of view to gain some performance. How about the edge-to-edge clarity then? Both headsets have good edge-to-edge clarity, but the Dreamer SE takes the edge here, in my opinion, having less of that slight blur at the edges, also leaving less chromatic aberration or color fringing in the peripherals. Then, Aliasing. I am a very picky guy when it comes to resolution, and I hate seeing jaggies or aliasing when playing in VR. I must admit that SE, despite lower render resolution and despite what I just mentioned about center area clarity, at the default resolution rendered, the SE gives me less obvious jaggies, less shimmery edges, so to say, or less of that stair-step pixelization in fine details that you can spot more of on the Crystal Light. That is aliasing. It's not a huge difference, but it is there. You might not see it in casual VR games like Half-Life Alyx, but when doing flight simulation in DCS World or MSFS 2024, it gets more obvious even with DLS's latest 4.5 version enabled. I said it before, I think it's due to the fill factor with these micro OLEDs. These panels are very tiny and the pixels have less space around each pixel because they are closer to each other, leaving a smaller gap compared to the QLED. And that makes a transition between each pixel look smoother and less apparent. At least that's my theory. But again, despite the less obvious jaggies using the Dreamer SE, while admiring the view of the cockpit gauges and digits you see, I still don't get the same center area clarity here compared to the Crystal Light. Well, tell me, what would you prefer? A brighter, a more alive image, also with a higher center clarity, but with more visible aliasing, or a less bright image with a bit lower center clarity, but a cleaner image in general with less aliasing? And yeah, we're far from done, there's more to it. SE and its micro OLEDs score some big points in dark scenes and high contrast environments, that's obvious. The blacks are pure black, and the extreme contrast levels are doing some kind of magic. A dark horror game or a flight at night unfortunately makes the Crystal Light look like a headset from 3 generations back. There's really nothing to discuss here. Despite local dimming, it can never match micro OLED. But then again, the QLED panel color accuracy is excellent, and the colors for some reason do pop more with the Crystal Light than they do with the SE. They just look more vibrant, especially red, orange, yellow and pink colors. I don't know why, but in bright daylight environments, let's say in a game like Lucky's Tale, the colors are just more punchy, more vibrant and more alive with the QLED, which is perfect for that kind of a game. It could be the fact that the color calibration on the SE is still being worked on in the firmware, that's what I heard, because the original Dreamer flagship also has better colors than the SE. Now, which headset do have more important benefits then? It's an extremely tough call, because it all depends on what you prefer doing in VR. Casual VR games look amazing on the SE, while very detailed environments such as Flight Simulator Cockpit just looks better, a bit better at least, on the Crystal Light despite more pronounced jagged edges. The center clarity in the cockpit is higher with the Light, hands down, and that together with the brighter image is enough, for me at least, to choose the Light if I had to pick one of these headsets for a dogfight in DCS World. I am honest here, guys, I'm not kidding. On the other hand, while talking flight simulators, Dreamer SE has the integrated Tobii eye tracking with the motorized IPD adjustment and supporting DFR as well as quad views, which is helping a lot with performance. And performance is the thing I want to talk about next. Crystal Light panel resolution is roughly 25% higher, but the render resolution, on the other hand, is on default more than 100% higher. In other words, more than double the number of pixels rendered on the Crystal Light compared to the SE. We're talking about 22 million pixels per eye at default image quality 1.0 in Pimax Play versus 9.5 million pixels per eye rendered with the Dreamer SE. By the way, do you recognize the value of 22 million pixels per eye? Yes, that's roughly what the flagship Dream Air renders on default. And if you haven't seen how double number of rendered pixels affects the frame rate, just check out my recent benchmark video between the Dreamer and the Dreamer SE. Yes, you can get double the frame rate with SE literally out of the box thanks to lower resolution rendered. But then again, yes, you are stuck at the 72 Hz and the 72 frames per second, of course, in native mode with the SE anyway. So yeah. Anyway, there are just so many aspects and variables to this. I really cannot make up my mind, and it makes it very difficult to come up with a recommendation which one is right for you. I thought this would be a clean sweep for the Dreamer SE, really, but it shows that the Crystal Light is still today a really strong competitor or alternative to the SE, especially if you don't care about the form factor and maybe even prefer the comfort of a bigger but well-balanced VR headset, just like I, for some reason, still do. Either you choose Crystal Light, save some money and get, at least in my opinion, higher center clarity, higher refresh rates, larger vertical field of view, much better brightness with no glare, and even better color reproduction as of now at least, then also better modularity for optional tracking types, and yeah, it is an established and proven VR headset with tons of happy users. Or you pick the Dreamer SE, spend a bit more, but get a sleek, nice-looking, small form factor headset with micro OLEDs, giving you pure blacks, better contrast, less jagged edges, better audio, built-in Tobii eye tracking with motorized IPD, and also higher frame rates out of the box. It is all up to you to decide, but at least now you know all the benefits of each. With all that being said, personally I'm still completely sold on the flagship model, the Dreamer, the original Dreamer. Not in terms of comfort or form factor, but the image quality and optical clarity overall. It's just on another level, and many others says the same. I do apologize, as I'm probably confusing it even more now. Let me know what you think in the comments down here below, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.